Hi, Ellie.
Can
Ellie, can
you
you hear
can
us?
you hear me? Can
Yes.
you
Yep.
hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
can't see you.
Oh,
And my experience has been I begin and then my audio kind of crumbles apart.
Okay.
I keep hoping that it will reconnect. There are people working at it, and sooner or later I'll be back with you fully. I'm going to stay while I can hear.
Okay,
Okay,
very
great.
good.
Well, we can
Very
see you
good.
very clearly. You look great.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you
Mhm.
a little bit anyway.
Yeah, well, good to have you here. Hi, Claire. Good morning to Australia. Anyway, we are continue our study in Mark's Gospel, and we're at that passage now, after chapter 4, the end of chapter 4, with the calming of the sea, the calming of the storm. We move into chapter 5, and the episode, as it's known, of the Gerasene demoniac. And it's very interesting, and that's why I kind of underlined it, that this was so significant in Mark. That Mark devotes a lot of space to this episode. I mean, he's talked about Jesus healing in general terms, and he has a couple of descriptions of healings, like the paralyzed man was let down through the roof, that kind of thing. But this is by far the most extensive narrative of a healing or exorcism. And just by way of comparison, Mark devotes 26 verses to it, and Luke only gives 17 verses, and Matthew shortens it up enormously to 11 verses. So it's evident that Matthew did not have the same concern for it and its significance as Mark did. He downgraded it a lot, even though Matthew's gospel is much bigger than Mark. He compresses these episodes, and that's one episode he compressed a lot. Luke has more interest in it because they say, Luke is the physician. He's interested in healing, and he's interested in the process of healing. So he gives it more space. But Mark makes it a dramatic episode in its own right that stands kind of almost equal to the execution of John the Baptist, and then even the passion narrative of Jesus. Even though the passion narrative of Jesus is obviously much larger, but still, this episode, it's like, if I was to compare it to a filmmaker, a director, this is obviously an episode where Mark's directorial interest and quality shines forth. It's kind of major episode for him. And so I asked myself why this is the case, why Mark devotes so much space to it and gives it this headline standing, this status. And I think there's a clue to go directly to a kind of answer to the question that will help us navigate through it. If we go to the very end of the story, in Matthew, what is it, verse 18? I think it is. Hang on, I better check this.
you mean Mark?
Matthew. Sorry, Mark. Yes, Mark. Mark 18 to 20, that's right. It helps us, I think, orient ourselves a lot to to what Mark is doing here. So if someone has that, they could read Mark 18 to 20. Go ahead, Mac.
As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
Even when I was a youngster, hearing that, it was kind of strange that this guy was just healed by Jesus, and a major, major healing from a legion of demons, who wanted to stay with Jesus, was kind of dismissed from his company, but then told also to go and basically proclaim the message of Jesus, of the Lord, in the Decapolis, not just to his friends, but to the Decapolis. And that alerts us to a wider meaning, I think. I mean, it makes sense to me now that Mark, the writer, is actually referring not to the period of Jesus, but to the Gentile mission. If he's talking about the Decapolis, he's talking about a whole area, which was in some ways Paul's mission area in the early part of his ministry. And if I can pull this up, if I got share screen, yeah, if I got share screen, I can host disabled participant. Will you enable
Oh
share?
no, hold on. I'm doing it. Hold on a minute.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
I didn't warn
Yeah,
you.
it's okay. It's all right now. It's done.
All right, thank you, Linda. All right, so share screen. Where are we? Well, I've got to be able to pull it up. That's a thing. Where is it gone? That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so can I show that? Go back to there. Share that. This is what I want to share. Right. This is a picture of the Decapolis. Can you see that?
Yep.
Right. So you can see over on the left. I mean, this is just incredible because it's all so contemporary. The Gaza Strip is just down there on the left. I suppose just south of Joppa here on the map. But the Decapolis are all those towns or cities. And then if you say city, you're talking about, I don't know, maximum about 5,000 people perhaps. But they're all in black there. So there's Scythopolis, Pella, Gerasa, Gadara, Raphana, Dion, Hippus, Kanatha, Philadelphia down there at the bottom, and Damascus at the top. Philadelphia was abandoned, but now is the capital, which I think is today is it called Assam? But it was the capital of Jordan, but whatever, that is now a big place.
Amman.
Amman. Thank you.
You can see the ruins of Philadelphia just out in the outskirts of the city.
So our well-traveled Mac has been there, so you can see the ruins. So this and then Damascus obviously now is a major place. So those are the 10 cities of the Decapolis. Decapolis means literally 10 cities. And you can see Gadara there, or Gadara, which is 30 miles from the river. So if Jesus goes to the area of the Gadarenes, and the swine go into the lake or the river, I don't know, he's a good bit away from the city. And then in the alternative manuscript tradition, sometimes it's Gerasa and the Gerasene area, and that's even further away. So the history of this is that, of these cities, these small cities, is that they were all founded in the wake of the conquests of Alexander the Great toward the end of the 4th century BCE. So these are all Hellenistic cities. They're classic, Hellenized, Hellenistic centers of culture and power. Or they wouldn't have been great powers, but actually their power was more significant of late, because in the year 63 BCE, that is 63 years before Christ, Pompey the Great, as he was known, conquered this area and incorporated these cities under Roman protection. So all these cities were Roman cities. They used to be Greek, and then and of course with the Greeks or Hellenized cities, they transitioned very easily into Roman culture. They are now Roman cities. So when Jesus goes deliberately across the lake to this area and encounters a man from the Decapolis, and it's mentioned explicitly there, as I say, at the end of the passage, that he says, go through the whole region, all the cities of the Decapolis, telling them about the Lord. It seems to me very much that this is not a reference historically to the time of Jesus. It's not, although it's obviously not impossible that Jesus did all these things. He crossed the sea, and there was a miracle there, a healing of a demoniac. But the reference to the cities and to the man going throughout those cities to proclaim the message of the Lord seems very much a reference to the contemporary Gentile mission. And that Mark has put it there, and it makes more sense that Mark puts it there as a signal to his readers that that's what this is about. And in addition, these, as I say, were Roman cities, or Romanized cities that brought under Roman control with Roman privileges and Roman architecture, in many instances, Greek Roman architecture. So I would think, or I would suggest, that this reference at the end, along with other references in the story itself, is alerting the reader at the time of Mark, is alerting to the reader of the Mark's gospel to Rome itself, to Roman city, the city of Rome, to Roman citizenship, which this guy had, at least in some level. He was one of those Roman protected cities. So by mentioning the Decapolis and placing that person within Gadara or Gerasa, which is well away from the lake, we are referring to a Roman city, and by implication, I would think, to Rome itself. So my feeling, or my sense is that this passage and the importance that Mark is giving to it is to do with the experience of the Christian community in Rome in something like the year 65, whatever, when it's being written around about that time. And Mark, the writer, is contextualizing the gospel for the Romans in his period, in his time of writing. He's contextualizing the gospel for the Romans, the Roman Christians, in relationship to this demon-possessed guy. And that's what makes it so important, so that we've got these episodes coming up, and they're all relatively, or preceding it, they're all relatively small, and then you've got the parables that came before in chapter 4, and then you've got this episode at sea, which evidently invokes, as we'll see in a minute, the figure of Jonah and the story of Jonah, who was on his way. Where was Jonah on his way to? He was going to Nineveh, the Rome of that time, of that epoch for the Israelites, the city of wickedness, the city of blood. Jonah was going on his way there and did not want to go for obvious reasons. But the whole marvelous story of Jonah is that he does go and really works an incredible miracle with his preaching, turns the Ninevites from violence. All this is being signaled for the first hearers of the preaching of Rome, in Rome, and where Mark is getting this from, I'm not sure, but certainly the Markan inspiration, and Mark himself writing it all down, he's contextualizing the gospel at this point. Is before we get any further into the gospel, before we develop this story any further, I want to situate this. I want to situate this gospel for you as citizens of Rome in a time when Rome is absolutely pagan. And with all the things that we know and can imagine about Rome as a pagan city of about 2 million people, is a huge place, and all the festivals and the games and the gods, the temples, all that is the situation of the Roman Christians at this time. You could try to imagine what it would have been like as a believer, either arriving in Rome or having been converted by someone coming to Rome, either someone before Paul or Paul himself. And Paul could still be alive at this point. It's not impossible. But you're surrounded by this immense, bloody, demonic city with Nero in charge. Nero, whose closest contemporary is our own president. Like doing things just completely out of left field and doing what he likes. And so it's what would it have been like to have been a Christian with this gospel that we're so used to since childhood? We just grown up with this thing, hearing it on Sundays and knowing its rules and regulations and its expectations and how you can be a good Christian and how you can be a bad Christian and all the rest of it. All this stuff that we're so used to. None of that existed back then. This was a totally new experience for these people. And you're within a context that is utterly alien to this message of a man who claims to be teaching and preaching in the reign of God, and who's crucified by the very authorities who are proximate right there in your face in Rome, the walls of the palaces, the Palatine Palace, all those palaces and temples, they're right there in your face. But you actually have allegiance to this man, Jesus, who was put to death by this system that you're in. What it would have been like to be a Christian and this emerging movement faced with that enormous actuality of Roman identity, militarism, and power, and still find yourself and know yourself as somehow different, actually hugely different, and having allegiance and commitment and faith in that huge difference. So I think that's the role of what we're going to read here, the calming of the storm, and then the whole episode of the Gerasene demoniac, who actually represents that whole Decapolis. The role of all that is to show that Jesus is actually more powerful than Rome. Is actually, and not more powerful in the imperial Caesar sense, but more powerful in the gospel sense, that he's going to transform the very basis of human existence. And we remember before we read this, that it's still, when this is being written, it's still 250 years to go before Rome concedes respectability and legitimacy to Christianity. For 250 years, Christianity is going to be at best despised and at worst persecuted and attacked. So there's a long way to go before Christianity reaches any kind of status when this gospel is being written, and what we're going to read now was being written down. And as I was preparing this, my sense of the role of Mark in this increased. I think, well, Mark has, I can't imagine who else would have been doing this, would have been writing and thinking so profoundly and skillfully with the material that he's got from the tradition, but placing it here and highlighting it the way he has. That Mark is situating the gospel over against the empire and over against the violence of the empire in a very, very deliberate and actually very powerful way. It's actually very, very penetrating. It drives deep into the reality of what your existence in Rome would have been. So let's just read, first of all, well, we'll read the whole thing together, you know, given the background that I've given. And then I'll ask you what you think before we get into any further. So let's read Mark chapter 4, verse 35, all the way through to chapter 5, verse 20. And if someone wants to start, someone else can pick it up.
I'll start it
Okay, right.
from verse 35.
Yes, correct.
On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. I read this actually on Tuesday night. It's the same passage.
You did? Oh, yes, we did. That's
Yeah,
right.
sorry. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains. The chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke into pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding. And the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered into the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
Very good, thank you. Hi, Andrew. Nice to see you. We've just introduced the end of chapter 4, which is the storm at sea, followed by chapter 5 and the whole episode of the Gerasene demoniac. And I tried to set the interpretative scene by saying that this makes most sense, especially with that the last verse where the man goes off to proclaim using in the gospel the word, I should think, kerygma, the technical term for the proclamation of the gospel, to the Decapolis, which is a whole region. It's not just his friends, it's the whole region. And it's a region of Roman cities under Roman protection since the conquest of Pompey back in 63 BCE. So I was saying that this is a stand-in or a substitute in some way for Rome itself. And the Mark, the writer, is showing Jesus's power over the demonic violence of Rome, which would have been the day-to-day context and experience of the Christians for whom he was writing at that very period. So rather than seeing it the way we, it's almost inevitable that we see it as just one of these wonder stories, curious stories, kind of visually very powerful stories from the gospel, almost children's book stories, but also cinematic in their way because of the storm and because of the demoniac. But we're kind of used to that genre. We just take it as a gospel genre. But actually, what I'm saying, this is much more, I think, at this point in reading it, the secret of the kingdom. So just back in chapter 4, we've had Jesus saying to the disciples, to you is given the secret of the kingdom. And then everything else is in parables. But this is actually for the community that Mark is writing for and probably teaching and preaching to. The secret of the kingdom is Jesus's power over the demonic violence of the cities. Now, before we go into any further detail, which obviously we can do, what do you think of that? How does it strike you? I mean, like in terms of we're learning the gospel here. We're learning the first of the gospels.
It does seem to make sense because you've got the demoniac and legion and the Decapolis. It's a very kind of Roman. He's outside of the main Jewish areas here. He's crossed the lake and has entered into kind of foreign territory.
He crosses the sea. It's almost like a metaphor for the Mediterranean.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem that his whatever he's doing, it's in the non-Jewish world anyway. And so that could definitely be a placeholder for Rome.
Right. And it would be very encouraging to know that this has all been signaled, first of all, in the prophet Jonah, whom Jesus invoked as no sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah, which we get in Luke and Matthew. But here we get this kind of imitation of the Jonah story, which we're going to look at the moment. So it just strikes me this is a teaching. I mean, what it would seem to me is a first-hand charismatic teaching in first century Rome for the early Christian community, how to spiritually resist the violence around them. You would need that. Go ahead, Claire.
No, I was just thinking then the part where the people come and beg him to leave, to go away and leave them be. I mean, I'm just wondering how the poor Christians felt like that, because presumably that might be referring to people don't know what living without violence could possibly look like. Well, we still don't know what it could possibly look like after whatever it was, 2,000 years. But it's sort of like you'd think perhaps not a really hopeful message for the Christians who are still living there when they think.
I mean, I think you're right. Like the people who say, please go away. I mean, that's a gentle way of saying we don't like you, and if you don't go away, we'll probably kill you. So yes, it's not, I think it's hopeful in as much as Jesus has this power to do these things, but it's not promising in terms of your status or your peace, the civic peace that you might want to enjoy in Rome. You're going to be persecuted like Matthew says in the Beatitudes, blessed are those who are persecuted. I mean, this is early Christianity. And as I kind of said, you know, it was another 250 years before Rome finally gave in quotes, you know, they didn't quite give in. They incorporated this movement, which couldn't be crushed. So well, let's incorporate them, you know. But beforehand, they just despised them and trod on them. So yes, it's not hopeful in a worldly sense. That is true. Although in a long-term worldly sense, I think it's hopeful. You're saying we haven't learned after 2,000 years. But I mean, it just strikes me that we probably never tried to hear before what the charismatic teaching in the Markan community would have been, you know, or even Peter in Rome, how he would have spoken about Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the savior, you know, like he's such a nice guy, healing people. But the challenge to this brutal city that's going to oppress you, that is something else that we can begin to hear today, I think. The challenge of the city of violence, the bloody city. I mean, like you're saying, have we learned it? No, because we've not really heard that challenge before. The challenge of the city of violence. Ray.
I had a question applying your kind of hermeneutic of this. I still wonder why Jesus did not allow the man with the spirits to follow him. Why was he told to stay and preach to the Decapolis?
I think
how's that fill in with the Roman interpretation?
I think it's because you've shifted time frames. I mean, I could hardly see Jesus, unless of course he was being strict about his 12 apostles. But then how would you leave that man just there on his own without any background, any teaching? I mean, he was a Gentile. He didn't have a Jewish, he wasn't going to synagogue on Sunday. He had absolutely no support. I mean, how could you possibly do that? It's an outlandish thing that Jesus does, unless it's meant to shift the reader to the contemporary time frame, that is when it's being written, and say this is now the time when the message of Jesus as died and risen, the whole gospel needs to go out into the Decapolis, which it already had gone, because we know that Paul preached in that area when he was first converted. So, and we also know that during the Jewish Roman War from the year 66 of this era, Christians actually fled to that area. They lived in a city called Pella. They went to so it was Christianized. It was already Christianized at this period when the gospel had been written, or relatively Christianized. You know, the message.
Okay, sure.
So I think that's the only explanation, that it's a signal to the reader to think about the contemporary Gentile mission, not the situation back then. I mean,
no, I think you're trying to tell us that. I needed to hear it twice. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's the only thing that makes sense. I mean, my inclination is that if someone was genuinely healed from demonic possession to such a serious degree, you know, 2,000 demons, he's going to need a continual community of support. I mean, to sustain that. I mean, like, so it's very unreasonable of Jesus to do that. So it doesn't strike me as historically trustworthy that's actually what happened in that actual situation. Jesus has no reason to do that. He has every other reason not to do that. So the signal to stay there and go and tell everybody is a signal for the contemporary period with the gospel being written.
Sure. Thank you.
And it actually, it's if you go to chapter you look at this. Chapter 13, verse 14, you get actually a textual note telling the reader that there are these two frames. If you go to chapter 13, verse 14, can someone read that? Chapter.
But when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, let the reader understand, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains.
So the gospel writer uses a note to the reader or a glance to the reader as a way of his writing. He says, you know, let the reader understand. So it's here, I think the reader has to understand what's being talked about here. We're talking about the Gentile mission and the Gentile mission to Rome, to a Roman city, which is not an easy place. So let's go into the details. If you look at we go to the actual story of Jonah. I mean, we know this, but it's always good to, you know, to hear it again. So Jonah chapter 1, verses 4 to 6, and then 15 to 17. Gail, go ahead.
Well,
Gail.
I just heard on the news today about a man, it was off the coast somewhere in South America, who was fishing with his son, and they were in kayaks. And the man, the father in the kayak was swallowed by a whale.
Are you kidding me?
No, and he was there for just a matter of not long, maybe a minute, and then was spewed out.
Oh, really?
Kind of whale that does not have teeth, and it doesn't have an esophagus big enough to swallow a man. But he was taken in, and his boat,
And
then
his
they-
boat.
and his kayak, and then they were spewed out. Now, I'm not remembering all the details or even where it was, but check it out.
Well, I mean, those whales are big enough to do that. Those sperm whales are huge. Yeah, I mean,
Now, we got the same little news snippet. It was off Chile, and apparently there have been about 4 or 5 other incidents around the world at different times.
Oh, really?
And each time, yes, they weren't hurt. Nobody got hurt.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be comfortable being swallowed by a whale. But
You'd
then
be-
being spewed out is a thing as well. So.
And he said he thought he was dead.
He did?
He did. And
Oh,
I was amazed to be resurrected.
there you are. I mean, it is a wonderful image of death and resurrection to be swallowed by a whale and then spewed out. I mean, that's great. So let's look at Jonah. We don't get to the whole story there, that we did those really interesting bits at the end there, or in the middle actually. But just look at chapter 1, verses 4 to 6, then 15 to 17, if someone's got that. Mac, please.
But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came upon the sea that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried to his God. They threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. The captain came and said to him, "What are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps the God will spare us a thought so that we do not perish." So then to
15 and 17, yeah.
So they picked Jonah up and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord even more, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights.
Thank you very much. So there are direct verbal echoes of the Jonah story in the mighty windstorm, Megala, that same adjective, can't remember the name for a storm, and then falling asleep, and then aren't you worried that we're going to perish? The actual word is the same in the Greek. We're going to perish, and then a mighty calm, a great calm, and awe falling on the witnesses. Do you think those parallels are by accident?
No.
No, you said quite definitely, Linda. No. Why are you so convinced that they're, well, if they're not by accident, they're by design.
Right.
So the writer is putting them in there. Mark is putting them in there deliberately.
Right.
And
So,
why would he be doing that?
well, to make you think of the Jonah story.
Make you think of the Jonah story. Dan.
Does I always think of Mark as a kind of a primitive author. Do you think Mark is actually has the freedom, the creativity, the imagination to kind of compose a gospel with these sort of allusions and references buried there for us to discover?
Well, whoever wrote the gospel, if his name was Mark, and I have no reason to doubt that, definitely did. I think the gospel works very powerfully in terms of deliberately trying to unsettle you and to redirect your attention to something else. And this is the first gospel writer. He doesn't have any model or template to work by. I think there's a lot of inspiration and profound understanding there in this writer. And if he's the same person as John Mark, who was a companion of Paul, then he had enough something about him to split from Paul. They broke up. I mean, I think Paul was not the easiest guy to be with, probably, but still, Mark had some kind of disagreement with him and went off on his own journey, if it's the same guy. And so that shows a considerable independence of spirit and spiritual depth, I would say. You know, not to believe, but to disagree at some level. I don't know what it was. So I think you're dealing with actually a very serious Christian thinker, theologian, evangelist, someone who really knows how to write a gospel. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, is write a gospel. What to choose, what to put in, what to leave out, and how to structure it. And the very fact that Matthew and Luke seem to have copied his structure almost, I don't know, 90, 96, 97%, very few variations and sequences and that kind, and often verbal, identical words used, shows how much status and prestige Mark had. So I think Mark, and we've not really regarded Mark as primitive, because Matthew and Luke seem to be much more sophisticated. Matthew has all this teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, and Luke has has similar sermons and this great concern for the poor, so it's more recognizable. But I think Mark is talking about really the crisis of Christianity entering in to the pagan world. That could not have been easy. That had to be, and I think we have a sensitivity for it today because the issue of violence has come to the surface. I feel that the issue of violence has come to the surface, and we know that is an issue. And as Claire was saying, after 2,000 years, we don't really seem any further forward on this. It's an issue. It's a sticking point. But the early Christians, they weren't in Rome to rebel. They were in Rome to witness to this other way. So I think they would have experienced it firsthand. They were not at home in Rome. This year, 2025 is a Jubilee year. So all good Christians are going to be at home in Rome. They go to Rome and they get an indulgence, a big one, just for going. So Christians are at home in Rome, but they were not at home in Rome back when this was being written. And that's the point. And that's what's coming to the surface in this stuff, I think. So as Linda says, she doesn't think it's there by accident, which and I think others agree, which means to say that Mark, the writer, probably knew, or certainly knew, of Jesus's reference to Jonah. The Jonah figure was already part of Jesus's repertoire of references and meaning. He knew that, and there had to be some tradition of Jesus calming the waves, a miracle of calming the sea, but then making that the same thing, rebuking and commanding to be still, the same language as he uses to the demons. So the writer of Mark understands the relationship of Jonah to Jesus. In other words, that Jesus goes into the realm of the demonic, of violence, and calms it and brings it peace, which actually Matthew and Mark do not understand. They give a variant, they give it their own readings. I think Mark is more on the ball here about that meaning, because of the way it's the intertextuality of the story of Jonah and the story in the gospel, and then where it's placed just before the Gerasene demoniac. He's very aware of what Jesus meant when he says the sign that will be given to you is the sign of Jonah. Mm-hmm. He's going to go to the place of violence and bring it peace.
Yeah, I think that rings true. As I hadn't really thought of that, crossing the sea, the destination before, that of course Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, was asleep in the boat, and he enters into the territory of the enemy. It does seem to parallel the Decapolis. You're entering into this enemy territory, really. And just the fact that there's swine on the, herds of swine of that magnitude,
right?
You would not find that in a Jewish
absolutely not
neighborhood,
and you would not probably find it at that size in the Decapolis. No city has a herd of 2,000 pigs. I mean, how many pigs are you going to eat in a year? It's not that much. That's an industry. Only Rome would have that size of. I mean, if you were imagining a a farm that big, and I doubt whether Rome had that size. I
Well,
mean, that's industrial.
symbolically, it means that the territory was infested with unclean animals
Yeah,
from a Jewish perspective.
right. And 1,000 is a
Is
military term.
is a legion, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's Paul had, does it say in Samuel, Saul has his thousands, and David has his tens of thousands. You know, all the people who follow him. That's a military denomination. It's like a battalion. Actually, it probably means a battalion. So, 2 battalions of pigs are drowned. You know, how many times did you have to get this message of this is to do with the military? This is to do with Roman military power. And I mean, what strikes me is that would, you know, like if you're a Christian and you're trying to follow Jesus in Rome in the year 65, something like that, that would be the major challenge. It wouldn't have been sexuality, and it wouldn't have been the temple. It wouldn't have been eating meat. I mean, for some, maybe eating meat sacrificed to idols, but most of all, it would have been the intense violence of the city and how to respond to that spiritually. That makes sense to me, that's what Mark is dealing with here.
And very contemporary for us. Really.
Why is it so contemporary, Linda?
Well, I mean, I was just following on from how we were, like the prayer for peace we did on Tuesday, that we're living in this violent pagan world really again. I mean, we're used to thinking of Christianity and Christendom and all the medieval and Reformation, but all that's falling away, and what we're left with is the worldly principalities and powers, and the church is trying to figure out what the gospel is all over again in that context. So it seems like we've come full circle somehow.
I think that's well said. I think that's true.
So the United States is the new Rome, and how are you going to get the demons out of it?
Well, you have to believe. I mean, you have, first of all, I mean, you have to be with Jesus where he is in that other space, which I believe you are. But it's just a matter of saying, oh, yes, that's what it means. It means he is in that other space. He is in that non-violent space, so that, which is not.
Well, no, he has and to believe, to have faith that Jesus has just through the word, by saying peace and be calm.
Yeah.
He can still the chaos, and he can, and he can, that love does have the power to overcome the demons around us, you know, and the demons and all that fury, the storm is always telling us that love has no power.
Right.
That's the world's message is to despair, give up. But the Christian message has got to be to remain faithful to our Lord.
We preserve our faith, or we have held on to our faith for the sake of salvation in the past. And salvation is this kind of general picture of being pleasing to God now, and certainly pleasing to God in the afterlife. And that's salvation, that we're not going to go to an eternal hell of torment, that we're going to be taken to heaven. I mean, that's the medieval, and that's even the Protestant version, you know, as Reuben is always telling us, PSA, which is not to do with the possibility of cancer, is penal substitutionary atonement. That this is what has dominated preaching. But now we're seeing, if we're reading, you know, they say in hermeneutics, is the word that Ray used, that hermeneutics is a kind of endless search. I mean, because a text can yield up different meanings. And it depends on the situation you're in. It depends upon the eyes with which you come to the text. And I think this meaning is coming to us now because it is, as Linda says, highly contemporary. And this, and Mark, if Mark was here now, he would be preaching it, how to be Christian in the new Rome, you know.
Yeah, because in a way, the Matthew and Luke are much more polished, and they're more, in a way, I mean, they're more focused on the church as a organization. Well,
Yes,
Matthew
they
definitely.
are very much so.
Whereas Mark is just right, it's right there in the middle of.
Mark has very little respect for the church.
Well, I mean, the church isn't really established
No,
enough
that's
at that
right. It's
point.
not established. That's right.
It's not that he doesn't have respect; it just didn't exist in that sense.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he's kind of got that raw in the middle of pagan world feel that we're experiencing now. Claire, you have something? You have
Yeah,
your hand up.
Claire.
I was just wanting to follow on from Linda Singer saying how in today's world how it's affecting us all, of trying to live spiritually in this world of sort of backwardness and chaos and barbarity, etc. Of trying to think of that, you know, be not afraid and peace, of retaining that peacefulness so as not to react with fear. Because I think that's what it is. Once fear is spread, people are either silenced by it and hence don't say anything at all, keep your head down below the radar, or you self-regulate yourself, sort of thing, so that you'll only do things that you think is not going to get you noticed or in an unviable way, which is very admirable when you see those prosecutors, for example, all resigning, you know, which is huge courage. But you sort of think that's what it means, I think, doesn't it, for us in today's world to live spiritually and practically.
Yeah.
About retaining that calmness somehow or other, which is very hard.
That's right. Not believing the lies of that. I mean, one thing that just to listen to people, every person's voice, you know, whether they're on the same side of you or not on the same side, but just hear that they're all bent out of shape with fears and anxieties of one kind or another, whether it's, you know, that transgender people are going to take over the world, or it's the other extreme, you know, and well, you know what I mean. So there's like this difference, but people are just they're all searching for meaning in this in their own ways, depending on their background and their history and their upbringing. And so to try not to dehumanize people, I think, or to demonize, I guess.
Yeah, right.
To demonize people is half the battle, I think.
Because
this
go ahead.
strain in what we're listening to, Trump telling us that God saved him for this. when somebody took a pot shot at him, and this vice president, whom I believe is a Catholic, and when you hear this incredible strident, the whole thing is you know, where are the good people? Why aren't they coming out? I mean, the strong people, where are they? Why is he getting away with
Well,
this?
Sheila, we went out for a meal about a week ago, and as Tony does every single time, and I'm the opposite character, he will always get into conversations with the serve person, you know, the wait person. And he was talking to this woman, or before we know it, she's talking to us about how to bring up her children so that they are good, respectful, responsible human beings, and that's where she's at. And so she voted for Trump because he represents something like that for her.
Yeah.
Now, so what's going on in her mind is that she's feeling out of control in this world, and she wants she feels like the young people are out of control in the schools, and you know, that they're shooting each other on the streets in Syracuse, and and what's the plan? And there is no plan. And so that's what her fear is. And she's telling us all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then Tony says, so do you mind me saying, how did you vote? She said, well, I voted for Trump because I think that at least he cares about that stuff. Now, of course, if you ask somebody else, they'd say he doesn't care about that. But for her, that's what he represents for her. So I think that you can multiply that by every person in the United States. They've all got their own
Indeed.
fears and worries, and they see that the world, I think this is more to do with economics than anything else, actually. Honestly, I mean, I think it's how wealth is distributed and all that stuff. But
Well, no, I mean, that's true, Lena, but what you just said there, she was concerned about actually spiritual
I mean,
stability.
I know that. So what
I
I'm
mean, she
saying
was,
is, everybody has their own. They're trying to figure it out. Everyone's trying to figure it out, and they're trying to work out some way forward in this chaos. So I feel like that image of the storm raging and roiling is spot on for our time, because people just don't know. They're lost their bearings, their moorings, whatever. They can't. They're crying out to Jesus to wake up and save them from the storm. And they're all just trying to make sense of this whole thing. And I obviously, I mean, I'm trying to make sense of it myself. And for us, you kind of get to a dead end if you start trying to. You hit a brick wall, I think, when you're trying to figure out who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. We're kind of beyond that, we're all in this storm together. So we have to figure out the third way, whatever that is.
Sheila, what were you going to say?
What I was thinking of was that when the Rome of ancient times was a huge pagan thing, the Rome of modern times is somehow or other pretending to be Christian.
Yeah, that is that is difficult.
That
is
is
very
tricky.
confusing.
That is, yes.
Well, I think the thing to hang on to is that the Rome of modern times, which thinks it's Christian, is still just as violent as ancient Rome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree with that totally.
That's where we mark the difference.
Yes.
Go ahead, Gail.
Well, and I can agree with what you're saying, but I'm trying to reconcile this with the way I've always interpreted this passage in more or less Gerardian terms, as the demoniac is the scapegoat.
Right.
And but it's different from a scapegoat who relieves the guilt of the townspeople, because they have to recognize what's happening. And they don't want Jesus to stay because they can't quite make peace with this idea that they could be saved from scapegoating.
Right. That is the Gerardian, that's the way he interprets it. And of course it's correct. What we've done is put it in the larger context of where all this violence is coming from. That if you have the name Legion and you're in the Decapolis, then you have to be referring to Rome. But Rome, I mean, of course, you've been there, you've been to the Colosseum, and it's just horrifying. It's so alive, it's so like there in your face. You could almost hear the roar of the crowds. You get 55,000 people into that seating, and the emperor would be there in the middle, and there'd be gladiators killing each other. You would have animals being killed and slaughtered, or animals killing people, killing Christians or whatever, anybody who's deemed disposable. And it was intensely popular. So why was that? Because it's the discharge of violence into that pit. I mean, so it is intensely scapegoating, but it's also recycling it. You see, it's not like it's an imperial chaos, because the scapegoating is not intended to work, like to cover it all over, and it's not like the initial sacrifice is actually keeping it alive. because the city has to keep it alive. Go ahead.
Well, and I see a parallel in what's going on with the undocumented people who are being rounded up and sent to Guantanamo. And it's almost like the graveyard, the land of the dead. And they're put there and they're at a distance from our society, and we're supposed to feel we're safe and that justice has somehow been done. And really what we're doing is just trying to find a scapegoat.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because we have such an intensely developed legal system, it's always possible for a lawyer to make an appeal or whatever, to make go before a judge for those people. So you put them out in Guantanamo, it's very difficult to do that. I mean, you have to get out there, you have to get access, you have to build a case. It makes it much, much more difficult. So it's like a sink, it's like a, as you say, a graveyard, the tombs. And so I think you're absolutely right. Implicitly, and especially for someone like Trump, who just loves dumping people somewhere or other, you know, he's sending them in shackles back to the poor countries. You've got that scapegoat, that kind of cycling mechanism, which you actually enjoy. So in a way, I mean, Gerard didn't tell the. I mean, he's absolutely correct that it's a scapegoating mechanism, but the fact that it's kept alive and as entertainment means that you've done something more with it. It's systemic. It becomes systemic, and that's what I hear you're saying about Guantanamo. It's part of the American system as it stands. So all those comments and reflections are incredibly important, incredibly vital to what it means is in respect of Sheila's question, how we make the difference between the Rome of then and the Rome of now, or the Rome of now having the veneer of Christianity, is that we can recognize the mechanisms which are the same as back then. They've not changed. If the mechanism, because in the Rome of Constantine, very quickly they banned crucifixion. And then they banned the games. So they did stop some external practices that looked like the way in which Christians had suffered in the past, but they created new ones, and especially in the Middle Ages, as we all know. So it was almost as if Christianity. I mean, Gerard actually says this somewhere or other, that Christianity had a sense of what it was about, but was not able to give that explicit naming or description, and so it lost it. I mean, there was a continuity with the revelation of the victim and the non-violence, the non-violent forgiving victim, and that's always been the case in Christianity. But the language to give it expression and to say that's our mode of life, that's how we are. I think Mark is doing that in a kind of the secret of the kingdom. He can't say it openly because it's probably too much. It's too much to ask a people to not be part of the city in that sense, and to stand at such a distance from it, or to make that. No, it's more like to make that an explicit part of your proclamation, because then that would invite persecution. But to say that within your, that's what I'm saying, within your spiritual self, within the community like we are here, we know that's who we are. That's our identity as not sharing in that systemic violence, that cycle of violence, that promoting the demoniac. There's always going to be someone who's going to be the one who receives that violence into themselves, not finding a way out. So we're a community. We seek to be a community that lives this peace of Christ. Peace, be still. bind the strong man, overcome the regime of death for the kingdom of God. So it's actually a new way of being in the world that, I mean, Christianity struggled with it, but I think, as we're saying, it's coming more and more to the surface today. So let's continue through the story of the demoniac to see more of these references and possible connections. And the guy lives among the tombs, which was the realm of the dead, and the dead were kept outside of the city in Rome. And in these Roman cities, there were places of uncleanness for the Jews, but also probably of spiritual danger, the realm of the underworld in the pagan cities. But this guy lives there, and he spends his time he's in shackles and chains, but he breaks them, and he's always howling and bruising himself with stones. So he turns that violence explicitly against himself, and they try to use violence to hold him, but at the same time, they're kind of happy, as we find out at the end, that he is assimilating this violence into himself. He's the pit of the dehumanization brought by violence. He's the one place where it all goes. So Jesus comes to him, and before Jesus says anything to him, he comes out at Jesus and he yells at him. So the hostility, the confrontation comes first from him. He says, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." So he calls on God to protect him against Jesus, which kind of means that he recognizes the God of violence, and that Jesus is going to torment him because he's trying to do away with that God or disempower that God. So he calls on his God, although he names his God as Jesus' God, the Most High God, in order to try to bring Jesus into his theological world, into his world where God is constructed out of violence. And Jesus refuses that. And he refuses. The way he deals with it is by asking him, "What is your name?" He doesn't enter into a conflict, a theological conflict, saying, "Well, my God is not the same as your God," or "My God is on my side, not your side." He asks him, he gets him to identify himself. In other words, he creates a diagnosis. He deconstructs the mystification of violence. And the demon or demon-possessed man comes straight out with it. He says, "My name is Legion," which Mark immediately glosses as many, which is actually a subterfuge and a misdirection on the part of Mark, because legion does not mean many. There are other words for many, like many, or crowd, or multitude. He could have used any of them, but no, he didn't. He said legion, which, as I say, is like battalion. It's unmistakable, but he covers it over by saying, "Well, we're not attacking Rome directly." I think that's what he's doing. But really, the implicit message is that what I am sick with is the militarism and military power that took over this area, beginning with Alexander the Great. I mean, military power had always been there, but the systematization of it, the sophistication of it from the Greeks onwards, that was something new. And that had taken over the area, and Pompey had shown that. So he's saying, what's wrong with me is all the wars that have been fought here. That's basically what he's saying. That's what makes me do what I do. It's all the power of the legions imposed upon this area. And he begs Jesus earnestly not to send them out of the country. But then Jesus goes one better. We hear at the end that the people of the country don't want Jesus there to disturb their way of their cultural order. And he says, I want to stay here. And what Jesus does, he sends them into, well, actually, he asks, send us into the swine, let us enter them. So they kind of he asks to enter into the pigs, but the pigs are unclean. And I think the reason why they're unclean is because they represent slaughtered flesh, which is very reminiscent of human slaughter, but animal slaughter is very, you see pigs hung up in abattoirs, they look a lot like human corpses at a distance anyway. So, I think that's why they're unclean. And they go to their like, they go into the swine, but then the swine go into the abyss, which is what Jesus has just controlled or brought peace to. So there's a circle there. He brings peace to the raging waters, which is where the swine go to. So there's a kind of displacement. There's a freeing up of the world of violence, but it's got to go somewhere, and it goes to the place, the kind of the heart of of violence itself, which ultimately Jesus himself will go to, I think, in the cross. Well, that's my reading of it. That the drama is delayed until Jesus actually gets to the heart of the problem in the cross. But in the meantime, the demons have to go somewhere. And then that's a kind of human way of thinking, that the demonic has to be locked up in some kind of abyss. But Jesus very definitely, using the Jonah image, goes to that place. Can you think of anything else that's thrown in the abyss in the Gospels? Mac, can't hear you. Mac.
We talked about how if one had faith, they could uproot a tree or a mountain, throw it into the
Yes,
place.
sir. Yes.
As if those,
And we said it was the temple man.
yeah, or sacred violence.
Sacred violence, yeah.
Yeah.
And that Jesus ultimately goes to his appointment with that place to bring it the transforming life of a God of nonviolence, with which the world has not known until him. It's incredibly radical, and I think this episode at the beginning is for the Mark's auditors, the readers, to situate themselves fully as recipients of this peace from Christ in a situation where they're surrounded by violence, so that they identify with it, so that peace is given to them. Claire.
I just really wanted to ask you to clarify again that by going into the waters, the seas, the pigs going into the seas, which have just been calmed by Jesus.
Yeah, right.
I'm thinking that this is a case of the violence then is subsumed by peace.
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think you're right. It is it's subsumed at a very profound level, because I mean I think that's the deal with human beings, you know, that we carry all sorts of wounds and violences with us, in us, through our whole history, you know, like who's not free of that, and it can be displaced to a certain degree, but the very depths of it have to be subsumed fully by peace, and that's what I think the Jonah story is about. And that's why the people in Nineveh were converted. It's an amazing prophecy. It's a story which is a prophecy. So the people in Nineveh all gave up their violence, and Jonah is the Hebrew prophet. He's the one who still hangs on to his violence at the end. He wants you to see what happens to the city. He wants it to be destroyed, but God doesn't want it to be destroyed. And Jesus is taking from that. But what Jesus does is that he goes to the very logical consequences of that, to the place of extreme violence, but where he can manifest divine peace and non-retaliation, forgiveness, love, and which is the gospel. So, if you were a first century Roman, let's say you are a slave, and you cleaned up. Your job was to clean up or to serve the meals. And then one of your fellow slaves said, there's a meeting at this place at somebody's house, and he's talking about this man who was crucified but rose from the dead, and he gives us his spirit, so you don't feel angry and hateful anymore. Do you want to come? And so you go, and you hear that story. You hear the story of Jesus bringing calm to the sea and to the demoniac. What would your reaction have been?
Hopefully to pray to God that your own demons might leave you.
Your own demons what?
Might leave you.
Might leave you. Right.
The
And they would.
The violence in you might be extirpated.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you. Well, if you got baptized, if you said, well, actually, I want to be baptized, you know, after a couple of meetings, I want to be one of these. That's what would have been expected of your baptism, that your demons would be, they'd be gone, and they would. They would. I mean, how did Christianity overcome Rome with a non-violent gospel? Like, in other words, they didn't rebel. They didn't organize a coup of any sort. They just endured basically for 300 years. How did Rome finally accept them if people hadn't done exactly that, Mac? They say, well, oh, yeah, okay, so whatever his name is, they overcame their demons, or their demons were overcome.
Or we could say Rome partly colonized the early Christian movement.
Yes, you could.
Today.
You could say that, Claire. Why would you? I mean, I agree with you, but why would you say that?
Well, only just because I think the history of Christianity from has been very sort of wobbly.
Yeah.
From then on. I mean, in terms of Jesus's message.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
the church immediately started to become powerful in the same way as Rome was powerful.
Yeah.
At least, yes, the Christian church. And I think, you know, in some ways that's has been the seed of where we're at now.
Yes, you're absolutely right. No doubt about it.
Well, the church used the machinery of violence of the empire to enforce unity
Yes.
and to spread the gospel to some extent. Not always, but sometimes.
Institutions are sacrificial.
Yeah. Well, the great thing is, I think, Mac and Claire and all of it, I think we're now coming to an awareness of this, not as a just kind of chest beating thing. I mean, you can say that, you know, there's the Inquisition, there's the Crusades, there's colonization. We've done all that stuff. You know, like the near extermination of the indigenous populations. I mean, it's horrendous. But now we're coming to an awareness of that together with this liberating gospel. It's not just that we've done ill, but actually we never quite got the gospel. So now we have a chance to get the gospel and be liberated by it, you know. I think that's what France is about. I think that's the spirit that he communicates.
I think his statement on the love was a response to J.D. Vance, who used that very phrase and talked about love in a concentric way, where you spend it first on yourself, then your family, then your neighbors, and if you have any left, eventually you can spread it to your country and then your enemies, right?
Yeah. He says Thomas Aquinas said that, and you can bet that Thomas Aquinas may have said something like that, but he was definitely much more nuanced.
Nuance is not Mr. Vance's forte.
Yeah, but anyhow, Francis replied he didn't even bother to argue about medieval theology. He went straight to the gospel. He went to who is my neighbor? Well, you know, who do you think was the neighbor? Well, it was this Good Samaritan, you know.
J.D. Vance is a Catholic who doesn't grasp the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah,
and spends his time identifying new scapegoats for the country to persecute.
there you go. There you go. So, but it's something to get a personal rebuke from the Pope. I mean, even I haven't achieved that.
You should write to Vance and invite him to come here for formation purposes.
Well, we should do, really.
To help him find his true Christianity, maybe.
Poor band, yeah.
Well, I mean, I still remain because of the kind of like grotesqueness, shall we say, of these responses that we're getting all over the place. It makes the gospel stand up more clearly. I mean, like it's even you know, secular witnesses would recognize that Vance, J.D. Vance does not represent the gospel. He represents something else, some kind of like a imperial synthesis that arose in the Middle Ages. If it even did then, I don't know. I mean, at least they had saints in the Middle Ages. I don't know as many.
Well, the problem is that at least half of the Christians in the country believe like J.D. Vance does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And most of them don't have eyes to see. And so our work has much before us.
Right. But yeah. But then I think because what Vance does is he deconstructs the gospel visibly, or deconstructs Christendom, and before your eyes, you know, the way he makes those arguments. It's so smug, and Peter Thiel's the same. They have that same kind of like we've got that tradition on our side. No, I mean, that's not Mark, that's not the gospel, it's not the sermon, it's not the Good Samaritan. So it makes this other thing stand up more clearly. That's what I feel anyway. Makes this understanding of the gospel that we have, and that we continually re-articulate every Friday, or try to, or every time we try, like keep doing it, keep repeating it. Because they can't shut it up. They can't. I mean, they can come out with all that BS, but they can't shut up.
And they all
Just-
appear to be so angry.
Sorry,
They all appear to be so angry.
I know. Yeah, I know. Well, that proves that violence is the issue, because even if you're righteous, you're still angry. So the change in the fabric of Christianity, in its texture, what it feels like, is what's happening now. And we are part of that. So, and the more you see it contradicted, the more you're confident in your hold on it. Just rub it between your fingers and say, oh yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Everyone knows that Peter Thiel created J.D. Vance, right?
Yes.
He converted him to his brand of Christianity and made him rich, and then bought his Senate seat in Ohio, right?
I did not know that about the
Oh,
Senate
yeah.
seat. Oh,
Peter
really?
Thiel.
I was told all that by one of the people who walked dogs with me in the park, and he named all of the people that Thiel got to give Vance jobs in the beginning, to give him his first lot of millions.
Who told you that,
And
Claire?
I was just one of the people I walk dogs with. This is in a park here in Melbourne.
He told you all that stuff, or she?
Yeah. I
Such-
didn't know that, but yes, it's amazing what we all know about. Just
You do. You're
Good
pretty
idea.
well informed.
That's great.
I was going to ask you, Tony, I was going to leave it till the very end of the meeting, but now that Theo's name's come up, did you ever do that interview that you were asked to? Last time you mentioned that.
Yes, I did. It was a written interview.
Available anywhere?
Well, it's going to be published in a French magazine, and I mean, it's not going to be very much, but he welcomed it, and he said he liked it, and it was moving. He felt it was moving. He's going to, he says, put it in his article, and I asked him to tell me when the article is published. It's a magazine called the Nouvelle Observateur. Nouvelle Obs is shortened, and I'll look out for it, and I'll send you the original.
Well, you wrote a more substantive article on Peter Thiel for Contagion, right?
I did. That's worth.
Could you send that to us?
I
Yes.
will. I'll do that. I'll look it up.
I mean, we could dig it up online somehow, but that's a lot of work. If you could send it to us, that would be really good.
I'll do that. I will, Mac. It's called ecclesia or exception. Yeah, he uses the work of a guy called Agamben, who talks about Guantanamo. He talks about bare life, nude life.
An
That
Italian philosopher.
he's a philosopher. Yeah,
Is that the Italian? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he says that people in Guantanamo, in the German concentration camps, and then obviously in Gaza and places like that, their humanity, their legal humanity, their status as belonging to a state,
Yes.
to a sovereign state, is removed from them. So they're no longer civil beings. They are bare life. He calls it bare life. And I use him, and I say, well, Thiel creates that. That's what Thiel is creating by advocating what he advocates. So I mean, it's a very academic thing, but it did get some notice, and that's why I got invited by this French guy to respond, because people know that. I mean, people kiss Teal's feet because I mean, I've seen he comes. It's like a god is coming to the meetings, to the cover meetings, because he's surrounded by bodyguards. And like, why would you be surrounded by bodyguards? Because you incarnate violence or something, or maybe you're going to invite it, and that's not what we should be getting at the cover meetings. We should be getting heroes of nonviolence and the passion of Christ.
Mm.
So the world is very easily, and the world of theology is very easily tempted off what we're talking about. But people like Bonhoeffer and Romero, they follow that way, and many others have done as well. Who's your great hero in Australia? You must have an Australian hero. I don't
so
want to embarrass you.
We have lots of heroes.
Oh, good.
Captain Cook, right?
Well, not like Captain Cook, but
What's
There's
the
one
minister, that guy with the long blonde hair, long blonde dreads? He's a
Who's that?
social activist
Well,
for
there's a
nonviolence.
there was a wonderful man who survived the Japanese prison camps.
Right.
He was a medico.
Right.
Yes, his name escapes me for the moment, but he did marvelous things for people who were wounded and hurt, and having to operate on people without anesthetics and things. Yeah. I'll find his name out and I'll remember it.
And you had a kind of non-violent movement in that island. What's that island's name? That Indonesia claimed.
East Timor.
East Timor, yeah, that's right. Yeah, there
Yes.
were leaders there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, the gospel is always struggling to come up and bubble up.
Mm.
We have, I mean, and there's some fantastic Indigenous leaders as well.
Yeah, right.
Christian, who become Christians as well, which is handy because then they can explain to us how the Indigenous spirituality works. Because up till that stage, it was always such an unknown.
Right.
Because until some of the Indigenous people, I mean, mind you, they're making all the effort to help explain it to us, because
Right.
we can't get to the stage of looking to their side and understanding.
Right.
I'm reading just such a book at the moment, by Stan
Ground.
and Grant, who is now a practicing Catholic, and he said it was through his Aboriginal spirituality that he came to Christian contemplation.
Oh, really? Stan
Grant, Grant.
Right. Okay.
Quite a prominent journalist who's sort of given up the press these days as they're not doing any good to anybody. So he's he's very Girardian too.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we are out of time now, and so would someone bless us with a prayer, as if they were at a house meeting in the year 65 in Rome.
Whoa. This is these Christians, how they love one another.
Right.
Well, we pray for a clarity and wisdom, and to know how to proceed in the chaotic times that we're living in. We pray that you will be our Lord and guide, and that you will strengthen us in this third way of being, so that we can find ourselves in the kingdom of God, in the midst of the worldly systems of violence, that we can, both for our own sake, find ourselves in the kingdom so that we can find peace in our hearts, but also to witness to that peace for the world as well. And we pray that we can be witnesses to nonviolence, and that you will use us as your instruments in the world. Amen.
And I thank God for everyone here, because everyone has their own journey, their own path. And it involves brilliant days and dark days, and the gifts of light and then times of uncertainty. But all that is incredibly important, because it's out of that is built a true disciple and follower of the way. So I thank you for each person here as a follower of the way. All of us. Amen.
Thank you, Tony.
Good night.
Don't forget to send the contagion article.
No, please.
Mac, I'm going to send it to you, then you send it to everybody.
Well,
I can do that.
I mean,
I can do
okay.
that.
All right,
Good.
okay.
Good.
Oh, I could send it if you send it to me, Tony, I can send it with the recording
All right,
tomorrow.
I'll send it to you. All right.
Okay.
Whatever. Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you. all.
Tony. Thanks, Linda.
Peace.
Peace.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Stop the bye-bye.